So we move into the 40s, and we have World War II, which has a huge impact on education. We have a massive amount of dropouts at the high school level because all the young men want to go and sign up. Well, what does this mean? It means that there's suddenly a lot more room for women in advanced courses in the high schools and in colleges. So after World War II, we get the GI Bill, and the opportunity to go to college is now very available for people who before, remember, there were a lot of women in World War II as well. Nurses, support staff. So there's an entire strata of society that suddenly has college right there. Thus, it changed the makeup of higher educational demographics. Oh, my stars, we need more teachers. So again, they're out recruiting, looking for people. Do you have a specialty? Would you like to be a teacher? Okay, that moves us into the 50s where we have the baby boom. What does this mean? We need more schools, we need more teachers, we need more materials. Television becomes a standard thing in an American home. Suddenly, at a point we've never had before, even though radio saturated American homes, there still wasn't that grab on the whole family for the same type of thing. Kids would have their Roy Rogers radio show, and adults would listen to one thing, and women would have their soaps. But television brought everybody together watching the same thing at the same time, whether it's I Love Lucy or the Jackie Gleason show. So suddenly you have this shared set of experiences and shared language. But what it also does is it gives people this vision of everybody needs to be Leave It to Beaver. Well, a little later in the 50s, we end up with the Red Scare. And what this did was it changed the climate in academia from, hey, if you know your subject area, go ahead and teach, go ahead and be progressive, ask the questions. Remember, we're coming out of that 1930s. Ask the questions you want to. You better watch what you say in class. If you say something and the students think that you're trying to lead them down a path toward socialism or you're questioning your government, you might very well lose your job. And here's the big thing, which all this wouldn't have happened without everything that had led up to it, without World War II, without television. We have more college-educated parents now, and /or we have more parents who have college-educated friends across social strata, right? So these people are now expecting their children to go to college. Not maybe we'll save up and maybe one of our 4 kids will be able to get to college for a couple of years. People are now expecting that their children are going to graduate high school and going to go to college. This was also the time where if you got your college education, you were pretty much guaranteed lifetime employment. Some big American company was going to snap you up and you were going to be a corporate guy and have a job for life. And then in 1957, everything starts spinning out of control, pun intended, with the launch of Sputnik, the Soviet satellite. Why? Because everybody's scared that now the Soviets are going to own outer space. So what does that mean for Americans? We've got to get our kids to all become math experts and rocket scientists. This fuels a back to basics movement in the schools again. Forget the arts, forget all that music stuff. We've got to get our kids doing math, and we've got to get them understanding the cosmos. We move into the 60s. Here we go. In schools, math and science are cool. But then, when Kennedy gets elected and starts making a push to get art back into our schools, plus the Kennedys have these huge galas at the White House where they're repeatedly inviting musicians and artists and poets, and that filters out into society. So the arts start becoming very cool again, and the idea of dissent starts coming back into the schools. Dick and Jane finally get a black friend. And in 1961, we actually see the birth of the concept of bilingual education. This comes out of all the Cuban families migrating to Miami from the Castro Revolution, and the Miami schools, the Florida schools, are just inundated with kids who don't speak English. These families, because there were so many of them coming over at the same time, the immediacy of having to learn English to survive wasn't there. So the schools for the first time started bringing in people to be teachers' aides who could speak both English and Spanish. And those wacky progressives are at it again, trying to pull away from everybody sitting down and doing the same page in the math book at the same time, to opening up the schools and what is it that you are interested in and how can we make this more meaningful for you. So a little bit more about the 60s. In 1965, we had two very important laws signed by Congress that actually still hold a lot of influence today. The first one was the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. This ended up being signed by Johnson as part of his war on poverty. They were working to get more teachers, more qualified teachers, into low-income schools. That same year, the Higher Education Act increased federal aid towards higher education, again, to try and get more teachers into low and middle income schools. The National Teacher Corps, these were teachers who, very much what today Teach for America has become, take people who either are young and fresh out of college and idealistic, or people who've already had careers and are looking for a change, teach them how to be teachers while they're actually in the classrooms. So we move into the 1970s and we're hit smack dab with equality issues in busing. Recognize that a lot of unintentional segregation had occurred simply because of demographics and economics. So the Supreme Court said that separate but equal, obviously not equal. However, to take that a step further, we have to ensure that there is a balance of races in all public schools, regardless of where the kids live. So you may have a child who lived across the street from a school, but if that school wasn't racially balanced, was forced to get on a bus and go to a school miles and miles away. The thinking behind this was, we want all our schools to be equal, we want all our kids to get the same opportunity. However, what happened was, first of all, we had what was called white flight, where the wealthy people in the city, mostly white, were refusing to let their kids be bused to what they viewed as the worst schools that were in the minority neighborhoods. So they moved out to the suburbs where it just wasn't an issue, or they pulled their kids altogether. We saw a huge explosion in private schools in the 70s. As well, it wasn't just about race. I mean, we have Sesame Street, which was hailed as absolutely revolutionary for its time. And the studies of it, even though there's people today who blame it for the birth of ADD, it was, and still is, credited with being the first show to truly teach skills that enable kids to be more successful in school. And what's interesting is that they were also the first show to have a deaf character as a regular on any TV series. This idea of equality in the 70s, it really exploded. It was black people, white people, Hispanic people, men, women, people with disabilities, people, deaf people, anybody you could think of, anyone stood up and said, no, I'm not being treated fairly, it's time I get my fair share. And in the 70s, take this another step, we get Title IX, no discrimination in sports for any minorities or underserved populations. Most people think of this only in terms of women. If your school is going to spend X amount of money on a men's football team, that same amount of money needs to be spent on some women's sports team as well. It completely changed the nature of athletics for women. Scholarships were suddenly available. It had huge lasting impact for many years, and we still see it today. Plus, we had the Education of All Handicapped Children Act, which gave us the phrasing least restrictive environment, and for the first time we see mainstreaming of children with different disabilities and learning issues. In the 70s, we see the introduction of quote-unquote new math. We also see the introduction of the metric system. This is what you're going to be using now, so go out and change America. Yeah, didn't last very long. Most of the teachers teaching it had no idea what they were teaching. It was scripted curriculum. The teachers were told to do it. They didn't understand it. The kids had no understanding of why they were learning this when they'd go home and they'd see gallons and pints and ounces. So, yeah, didn't work. And then in 1977, there was a huge public outcry over a report on declining SAT scores. So what do you think this led to? Aha! Another back to basics movement. Get rid of the arts, get rid of this progressive stuff, get these kids to know their facts.